So it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Allan Kaufman. Allan is a veteran. After serving our country, he was Director of Environmental Health and Safety and Fleet Safety for Quest Diagnostics. Allan has always been civic-minded. He chaired the National Committee on Distracted Driving for the American Society of Safety Professionals and National Highway Safety Administration. Today, Allan is a volunteer ambassador for the Alliance for the Great Lakes. We enjoyed Allan's excellent talk last year when he shared his experiences as a volunteer diver at the Shedd Aquarium. Today, he's going to dive even deeper into something even more vital to those of us living on the shore of Lake Michigan. Allan, welcome back to our Tuesday Club. I turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank you, Ron, for the introduction. I'd like to thank the North Shore Senior Center and the Tuesday Club for allowing me to make this presentation. And I'm going to share my screen so we can get started. And today we're going to talk about the environmental effects on the Great Lakes region. And the Great Lakes region, as you see on this map here, makes up a large portion of the North and Midwest. It makes up the five Great Lakes: Ontario, Erie, Huron, Michigan, and Superior. 8 states: New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, and also parts of Canada. Also, you'll see on the Great Lakes, there are some very large cities. There are some very small cities. All of the 8 states I mentioned, including some that are not directly part of the Great Lakes region, have an agricultural component to them, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The other thing to be aware of is you see on the map a lot of blue and red lines. Those are streams and rivers that are flowing into the Great Lakes, and they have a lot to do with the environmental effects on the Great Lakes. So let's get started. The Alliance for the Great Lakes is about protecting water and sustaining life. The mission is to conserve and restore the world's largest freshwater resource, again, the world's largest freshwater resource, using policy, education, and local efforts, ensuring a healthy Great Lakes and clean water for generations of all people and wildlife. And please note that the word generations is underlined and bolded, because we are there to try and provide clean water for not only us, but for our children, our grandchildren, and their children. It is really important that we keep the Great Lakes clean. We do it with 3 main objectives: advocacy and leadership. We are out there talking to leaders in the municipal governments, the state, and the federal governments about how important the Great Lakes are. We do education, just like we're doing now, and hopefully that will lead to some action. And we do research and analysis from the action that we do. We'll talk about that in a little while when we talk about our Adopt a Beach program and others. And from that research, we can go back and do advocacy and leadership with more information. To give you an overview of advocacy and leadership, I just threw this letter out there. This is a letter from Senator Durbin that I received just a few days ago. And we were corresponding on the infrastructure bill and how important the Great Lakes are. I'm not going to read this whole letter for you. I just want you to know that we are out there and we are fighting for clean water and keep the Great Lakes clean. So just wanted to emphasize the point that we do talk to these people. So here's my question of the day to you. Raise your hand if you drink water or any liquid made from water. I'm assuming that pretty much everybody out there has their hand up, because water sustains our lives. It is really important. And we need to have water to continue living. That's why the Great Lakes are so important. So I'm going to give you an overview of today's presentation. We're going to talk about the major problems in the Great Lakes, and they're going to be in red. They're not the only problems. They're what we consider the major problems. We're going to talk about the importance of the Great Lakes, what we or you can do, and then working with the Alliance for the Great Lakes. So those are our four main topics that we're going to talk about today. So when we look at the Great Lakes, again, there's our map. The five major problems that we have identified and scientists have identified are pollution, climate change, invasive species, plastics, and habitat destruction. We're going to talk about each one of those individually. So when we talk about pollution, and now you see pollution's in blue because there's different parts of that. So keep in mind that we just switched over to just one, the first major problem. We have agriculture. From agriculture, we get runoff of different chemicals and so forth into the water table. We have industrial problems. And that's a lot of discharge or just actually dumping right into the Great Lakes or the streams and rivers. We have waste. Some small cities around the Great Lakes are still dumping their waste into the rivers and streams around the Great Lakes. And plastics. I want you to look at this picture of this hill of plastics. This is throwaway plastics. And look at the loader at the top to give you an idea how big this mound really is. What you do not see are the three other mounds behind this one. So plastics is not only a pollution problem, but plastics is a major problem that we'll continue to talk about. So let's talk about the first one, agriculture. Agriculture is basically excessive use of chemicals and fertilizers, which we're seeing more and more of because the farmers want their crops to be healthy. And also those farmers or those areas that have animals, we get waste sediment. It goes down into the water table, and then from the water table, it goes into the streams and rivers, which flow into the Great Lakes. So we see a lot of pollution. And we'll bring this back up again when we talk about some other parts of this. We have industrial pollution. I'm sure many of you probably are aware of Waukegan Harbor and what happened to it many, many, many years ago. In 1987, the EPA declared the Waukegan Harbor the world's largest PVC mess. And PVCs are polychlorinated biphenyls, which are a hazardous waste product of the manufacturing industry. There were three main companies, but not the only companies identified: Outboard Marine, John Mansville, and Yeoman Creek Landfill. And under the EPA in 1992, Outboard Marine started to clean up at a cost of $150 million plus. In 30 years, they finally got the PVC to an acceptable limit. The picture that you see on the left is what the harbor used to look like. Pretty severely damaged. The picture on the right is what it looks like now. The interesting part is you can still test the water and still get PVCs when we test the water. It's not at a high limit, but they're still out there. And just recently, you probably saw it on the news not too long ago, in September of 2021. U.S. Steel had an iron spill, what they called an iron spill, that went from the Indiana side of Lake Michigan and flowed out into the Illinois side of Lake Michigan. They actually had to close a national park, the Indiana Dunes National Park, because of it. And they were working on cleaning it up. It was a pretty pretty significant spill. And then what happened just 2 weeks later? Oh my God. The same company, US Steel, had another spill, only this time it was an oil spill. And it followed the same path as you saw here. And they said, oh, well, it was just a mistake. We are still experiencing this kind of action in all of the Great Lakes. It is not just Lake Michigan. Okay, let's talk about the third part of pollution called waste. If you remember a long time ago, what the city of Chicago used to do when they get heavy rains and the city started to flood and the streets and the sewers started to flood is they would open up the locks and let all the raw sewage flow into the Lake Michigan. Unfortunately, the EPA said you can't keep doing that. It's really going to affect the lakes. So in 1975, they started what's called the Deep Tunnel Project. You probably have heard about it if you live in the Chicago region. It took 30 years for phase one and $30 billion. Wow. And now all of that water, and we are having more significant rain effects here in the Midwest, goes into one of the three reservoirs where it is treated slightly, and then it can be released into the lake clean. The raw sewage is hauled away. But guess what? That was phase one. Now we're doing phase two with a scheduled completion date of 2029. And we don't know how much it's going to cost. Now, yes, federal, state, and county are paying for this, but it's still costing us a lot of money that could be used for a lot of other purposes. But at least we're keeping the lake cleaner. Remember, I talked about plastics, our fourth problem of pollution. That's why it's in blue and in red. Look at these two men. They're holding up the sign, polluted by single-use plastic. They are standing in the water near Detroit. And what's happened is all of this plastic is floating near the Detroit harbor. Wow. And we keep doing it. We keep doing more and more of it. And I'll give you an example. A lot of you in the Chicago area go through the forest preserves in the summertime. How often do you see a plastic bottle or something plastic laying on the ground there? We are doing this to our planet. And yes, I'm passionate about it. So to review the four problems of pollution: agricultural, industrial, waste, and plastics. Those are causes of pollution, our number one major problem. Our number two major problem, climate change. Wow. And here you see the Great Lakes. And what you're looking at is the warmest the Great Lakes have ever been in the last 5 years. The warmest. The planet is getting warmer, and it is affecting the Great Lakes. And when the Great Lakes start warming up, we get things like algae blooms, which we'll talk about, and habitat destruction, which we'll also talk about, which affects clean drinking water. And this is not from me, this is from NOAA. So they monitor this all the time. The Great Lakes are warming up. Less ice flow, we see less freezing over, and it is really becoming a problem. The other problem, and Ron was concerned about this with his kayak, the Great Lakes are getting higher. They are at the highest levels they've ever been. And they've monitored this for a long time. Now the levels do go up and down, but right now we're seeing them at the highest level they've ever been. And it really is, again, affecting a lot of the habitat around the Great Lakes and other problems that we're having. Some of the problems that we're having is erosion. This is a walking bike path in Wisconsin. You can see it's being eroded. And this is happening all over the Great Lakes. As the water level goes up, things are becoming eroded. This is a house in Michigan. It's being shored up because the lakefront property is eroded. And they're hoping that it won't get all the way to the house where the house will actually fall into the lake. But it's happening all over the Great Lakes. And many of you, when you're younger years, maybe now, might remember North Avenue Beach here in Chicago. Well, look at the white line that you see running across. My arrow is kind of following it. That's where North Avenue Beach used to be. Today, you can see how much further inland it has become. And the famous boathouse at North Avenue Beach, scientists now say that in 10 years, if we don't stop what's happening, that boathouse will be underwater or in the water. North Avenue Beach. When I was a kid, we used to go on North Avenue Beach. Now there's less and less beach to go on. Wow. So climate change is playing a big role in the Great Lakes. One of the big things that is happening is called algae bloom. Algae is an underwater or a water plant that grows. The primary source of algae blooms is phosphorus. When we talk about the chemicals and the fertilizer and the waste being dumped into the lake, a lot of those have high phosphorus levels. So it just creates an environment for the algae to grow, along with warm weather. Again, we're seeing warmer and warmer Great Lakes, sunlight. And algae can be toxic, and it's going to cost us more to treat the water because we want clean drinking water. It's toxic to the fish in the water. So when you see algae on your lakes or even your small lakes, it is toxic to the wildlife underneath the water. They can't get air to breathe. Here's Lake Erie from space. Lake Erie is probably the most polluted of the Great Lakes right now. 2/3 of it is covered with algae. So imagine about all the people like in Cleveland who are trying to get fresh water from Lake Erie. It's tough. It's really tough. And I want you to take a good look at this picture. You see the algae growing here. Well, this is Lake Superior. Never before has Lake Superior had algae blooms. Lake Superior has always been the cleanest and the clearest of the Great Lakes. Very few major cities or big cities on Lake Superior. It's also the deepest of the Great Lakes. But now we're starting to see algae blooms on Lake Superior. Wow. It is affecting all of the Great Lakes, and it will affect our drinking water supply eventually. But I don't want you to think that climate change is just about the Great Lakes. I want to get away from the Great Lakes for a minute or two, and I want you to look at this picture. This is Lake Mead. And Lake Mead is currently at 143 feet below its original level. Lake Mead was created by damming up the Colorado River. 25 million people in 7 states rely on Lake Mead water. Many of the states you see here have agricultural components to them. Some grow cotton, some grow grapes for wine. and all kinds of other things. Well, guess what? Now the federal government has cut off their water supply. They can't irrigate their crops. In some of the states, they have cattle farms or other types of farms, animal farms. They can't get water to feed the animals because the federal government has said you can't use the water. We need it for the people. It's at 143 feet below original level. And many of us, if you watch the news, you've read about or heard about the fires out west and everything. Climate change is affecting our country. It is affecting our world and is definitely affecting the Great Lakes. The third major problem, Ron, I hope you like this one. This is invasive carp. And a lot of people are fishing it, but invasive carp is one of two major invasive species that we have that we're concerned about in the Great Lakes region. I want you to understand how invasive species get to us. In the shipping world, many of the cargo ships come from other ports around the world. And as they load their cargo, they have to add ballast water into the ship to make it level so the ship doesn't list back and forth and up and down. So they add ballast water. They're not particular about what's in the water. They're just adding it from the ocean. And oftentimes, animals like this get caught in the ballast water. Then they come to the port to unload their cargo, and they have to unload the ballast water, and they just dump it in. The invasive carp have come from the Gulf of Mexico. They come from the Far East and then came here and were dumped into the Gulf of Mexico. They are voracious eaters that will eat everything in the water that they can find, and they multiply at a very high rate. Currently, the state of Illinois and the Army Corps of Engineers has an electronic barrier because they came up the Mississippi River into the Illinois River and then the Des Plaines River, and they are close to getting into Lake Michigan. If they get into Lake Michigan, they will get into the other Great Lakes, and they will destroy all of the wildlife, underwater wildlife in the Great Lakes. So now with the new infrastructure bill that we talked about a little bit earlier, the Army Corps of Engineers, the state of Michigan, and the state of Illinois is developing a new structure barrier at the Brandon Road Canal, which is where a lot of the Asian carp are coming down in Lockport. You can actually go to Lockport, which is just south of Chicago, and see it. And they're hoping that this will stop the Asian carp from moving forward. So that's the one big species that we have. The other species we have are the zebra and quagga mussels, the mussels. They, again, came from ballast water on ships, have come up the Mississippi River. They are, and you'll see in a few minutes, in all of the Great Lakes currently. They multiply at a dramatic rate. The interesting part is they do some good. They do a lot of bad, but they do some good. They eat microorganisms. So when they eat the microorganisms, they actually are cleaning up the lakes. And we have seen an increase in visibility and an increase in the quality of the water from the zebra mussels. But because they're so invasive, they attach to anything and everything because that's how they get their foothold. And I'll give you an example. I'm a volunteer at the Chicago Botanic Gardens. And if you come to the gardens, you walk across a bridge to get into the gardens. And on the right side of the bridge, there's a nice little lake. And often there's a fountain that's shooting water up. It's very peaceful and calming, very nice. Well, the last 3 years, we haven't been able to use the fountain very often because the zebra mussels have come from Lake Michigan down the north branch of the Chicago River into the Skokie lagoons and into our lake. And now they are attached to the bottom of the fountain, so the fountain can't work. And this is the destructive part of what they do. So while they are very plentiful, they are also, they clog every mechanism that's in and around the lakes. And here you can see a map of the red is the zebra mussels. And they're in every Great Lake right now. The green, Lake Michigan, you can see the guaga mussels are in Lake Michigan and some of the other lakes, Ontario and so forth. They are very invasive species and we have to be very careful about them. There are some researchers that are looking at ways to stop them from reproducing, which is probably going to be a good thing. Okay, the fourth major problem is plastic. We're going to spend a little more time on plastic because it's really becoming a problem. The Great Lakes, the Alliance for the Great Lakes has a program called Adopt the Beach. And we'll talk about in detail the Adopt the Beach program, but it's basically people going out to beaches and picking up trash. We've been doing it for 30 years. Up until about 5-7 years ago, the amount of trash was about 50-50 regular trash and plastics. And I want you to look at the circles that you see here on each lake. On Lake Ontario now, we are picking up 96% plastic, only 4% other trash. In Lake Superior, 85% plastic. So the amount of plastic that is being either dropped on the beach or floated onto the beach is significantly increasing. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little quiz. Everybody get ready. No, you don't need pencil and paper, and you can probably do this all in your head. Here are 5 items: banana peel, newspaper, plastic bottles, takeout containers, and plastic straws. I want you to look at these items and think about throwing them into a landfill and how fast they're going to degrade in the landfill. So take a second or two, kind of look it over, get your order in your head, and then we'll go through it. Okay. First one, the shortest, banana peels. Organic material, 2 to 5 weeks. The newspaper, 1 to 5 months, not too bad. Takeout containers, 50 to 80 years. And I'm going to stop here for a second because I want to talk about takeout containers. What's happening now with COVID is restaurants are in dire needs of people coming in. They're not getting them. People are taking out more. The restaurants have financial concerns, so they're using a very inexpensive way of putting whatever food you order into a container, which is plastic. Plastic is a very inexpensive container. There are containers that break down much faster in the environment, but they're much more expensive. So we have seen a 60 to 70% increase in just 2 years in the amount of plastic containers going into the environment. Just 2 years. Wow. Plastic straws, 50 to 100 years. Now, when I was working at Shed, we started a program about 12 years ago to eliminate plastic straws. Because what we found was, especially in the ocean, what happens is the animals will eat the plastic straws. They think they're food, and then they suffocate. But plastic straws are definitely a big issue. So we started a program. People don't like the paper straws because they tend to collapse, but it's a much better for your environment. And now the last one, plastic bottles. Take a guess how long you think it takes. 450 years. 450 years for because they're thick, plastic bottle to degrade into the environment. And guess what? It never really degrades. Because what it becomes is it becomes small pieces like you see here in this person's hand. And then when it starts to degrade further, it becomes microplastics. And now we're hearing more and more information about microplastics. And they are getting into everything. If you read this article, this little sentence here, we are eating microplastics. It's in our diet. It's in our body. Because many of the fruits and vegetables that we eat have microplastics that come up through the root system, the water in the root system. Animals and fish have microplastics in them. We are ingesting microplastics. Is it a problem? Absolutely, it's a problem. And it's a big problem. Now, I know this is a very hard slide to read, and I apologize up in advance. But what it does show is how long it takes our trash to break down into the environment. So if you throw a pair of leather shoes out into the into the landfill, to the garbage, it takes 25 to 50 years to break down. And you can see some of the others that are on here. And like I said, I'm sorry for the quality of the slide, but it highlights a point. And it takes a long time. We are creating trash. And it takes a long time for that trash to break down. Some companies are starting to do things about it. If you've heard of the company Aramark, which provides food service at a lot of institutions, at the Shedd Aquarium, at the Art Institute, and so forth, they are eliminating plastic straw, the single-use plastic straws this year. Coca-Cola, they want to recycle every container that they put out by 2030 to reuse. And McDonald's hopes by 2025 that all of the materials that they put food in, cardboard boxes and so forth, are made from recycled material. Here's another interesting one. That Coca-Cola has partnered with a company called Virant. And basically what they are doing is developing a plant-based, they have some prototypes, a plant-based bottle, which will break down very quickly into the environment. It includes the cap, which is plant-based also. There's a couple issues with it. It costs a lot more, and it uses more energy. Plastic is a very inexpensive product to produce and doesn't use a lot of energy to make. So we're seeing alternatives coming down the pipe. The fifth and final major problem that we're going to talk about is habitat destruction. Now, in the Great Lakes region, we have identified, not we, scientists have identified over 3,500 different species of plants and animals. But with all the things that are happening to the Great Lakes, they are becoming endangered. We're seeing some less of some fish that we normally saw a lot of in the Great Lakes. We're seeing less and less of them. And here's a really interesting fact, that because of the height of the Great Lakes, certain species of trees are dying. And we're seeing a high mortality rate on certain species of trees, those right near the shoreline. Well, what's happening is scientists are measuring that the trees are actually finding ways to move back away from the shoreline, either by dropping their seeds or creating new roots and so forth away from the shoreline. So we are losing trees at the shoreline, and it's really an amazing process. It's survival of the trees, and it's certain species, because they're afraid that there's a high tree mortality with things that are going on. And you notice a lot of these problems are connected. Habitat destruction, climate change, pollution. These are all causing things to happen. When we talk about habitat destruction, now I know this is a sea turtle, but when we throw things in the water, like plastics, single straws, the underwater animals eat that. They think it's food, they eat it. They can't digest it. So either they starve to death, or sometimes it gets logged in their throat and they just choke to death. Here's a bird with a six-pack. He's caught in a six-pack. How many times have you taken 6 cans of pop or water and just thrown the holder away? What you can do is cut it into different sections and open up all of those holes, so then the bird can't get their head caught in there. And look at this. This is one of our Great Lake ducks. And the Great Lake duck, look inside and see what you see in there. Could not digest any of this things in there and eventually just died. This is what we are doing to our environment. So to review the 5 major problems of the Great Lakes, and again, these are just the major, not the only. Pollution, climate change, invasive species, plastics, habitat destruction. And it's not stopping, really, it's not stopping. So why are we concerned about the Great Lakes? Well, we're concerned because the Great Lakes holds about 90% of the usable fresh water in the United States. Wow. It is the greatest single source of fresh water in the world. More than 40 million residents in the US and Canada depend on it. 1 in 10 Americans, 1 in 4 Canadians depend on the Great Lakes for their fresh drinking water. We at the Alliance, our main goal is to provide fresh drinking water to make sure that the lakes stay clean so everybody can get clean drinking water, and to change the wastewater infrastructure, which is being challenged, really. The new infrastructure bill is going to help that. So I want you to look at this. This is all these cities. Some are on the Great Lakes. If you see a GL, it's a Great Lakes involved city. Maybe it's a river leading into the Great Lakes, like Pittsburgh. But all of these cities have had problems providing clean drinking water. Big cities, little cities, for different reasons. And there are many, many more. Think back just a few months ago on Dixmoor in Illinois, having problems. And the people had to boil their water. If they could get water, they couldn't even get the pressure to get water out. It is becoming a major infrastructure problem, and we need to address it. Everyone deserves clean drinking water. Your children, your grandchildren, you deserve clean drinking water. Now, we're pretty lucky here in the Chicago area. We have what's known as the Jardine, which is what you see down below here, just south of Navy Pier. And way up near the top of this picture is the Sawyer South Water Filtration Plant. I've been in the Jardine plant numerous times, and it is really something to see. But the interesting part is they are, the Jardine and Sawyer, the #1 and 2 supplier of fresh water in the world, and we have them right here in the Chicago area. Right here in the Chicago area. They provide 1 billion gallons of lake water daily. Wow. And I want to give you a little, if you don't know how it works, I'm going to give you a little tour real quickly. As you drive along Lakeshore Drive, you've probably seen the cribs out on a couple miles out of in the water in Lake Michigan. When they're not clogged up by the zebra mussels, which they are now more frequently, what happens is the cribs pump the water into a holding tank at the filtration plant. There, big pieces of solids and stuff are filtered out, and the water is put into a bigger tank, cleaned of any materials, and it is treated with chemicals. From there, it goes into an amazing filtration system. It's all natural. Sand and gravel and so forth, and layer on top of layer, and the water is filtered down. Finally, it gets to a holding area where the water is tested. The Jardine has one of the world's most finest microbiology labs, and the water is tested all the time. If they deem it to be clean, it is pumped by one of our pumping stations out to cities and communities and residents throughout the city and suburbs of Chicago. That's how it works. It's pretty simple. We pump it in, treat it, filter it, pump it out. And we have the world's two largest filtration plants in the world here in the city of Chicago area. But what we do also have is when we pump it out, it's going through lead pipes. And if you remember that list of all the states, the top 6 cities have lead pipes. That's a very, very old system. Unfortunately, Chicago has more lead pipe service than any other city in the United States, and Illinois has the most of any state. So the water is flowing through the lead pipes. The lead pipes are leaching the lead into the water. About 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, the city started to replace it, but slowly. They're using copper pipes now. With the new infrastructure bill, there will be money to replace almost all of the infrastructure lead pipes in the surrounding cities all over the United States. Good thing. So the problem is, what can you do? Here you are, you're watching this presentation, and what can you do? Well, I talked about a little while ago an Adopt the Beach program. This is really a fun program. You can get a group of people, doesn't have to be a large group. It can be your family, it can be kids, it can be your religious group, just a bunch of people. You sign up at adoptedgreatlakes.org and you go out and you spend an hour or 2 on the beach, and you pick up trash that we talked about. And what does the trash do? Well, we measure it. We log in everything that we take. That's how we know the numbers, so that we can go back to Congress or the state and talk about what's going on in the Great Lakes. We get our research and information from the things you do. You can take the plastic-free Great Lake Pledge. The link is down here at the bottom. And I pledge to do my part to keep plastic out of the Great Lakes. I will. Refuse to use single-use products. As you can see here, I'm not going to read the whole thing. Reuse products such as water bottles that are reusable. Get involved in an Adopt the Beach program or others, and spread the word. Tell your family, tell your friends. The Great Lakes needs your support. You can become an ambassador. We are volunteers. We get a lot of training, so we understand what's going on. And we get out there and we help. We also appear at certain conferences. We'll have a table and talk about the Great Lakes and how important it is. You can subscribe to the emails at greatlakes.org, subscribe. And every time something happens, they'll send you an email. You can take action. Let your Congress people know how important the Great Lakes are. That's one of the most important things. That's why we got the kind of money we got in the infrastructure bill, because we took action. And you can connect with us. We're on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and learn about things that are going on in the Great Lakes. There's all these links. Ron and Jill will have them available if you are interested in them, or I can send them to you.
The links are on chat, Allan.
Okay, thank you, Ron. So I want to thank you all for listening, because it's really important. This is about your drinking water, your family's drinking water. If you have a group or an organization of any kind, I've spoken to school children in 4th grade, and we can tailor the program for them, or another group you would like to have a presentation, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'll be happy to work it out with you for any length of time you want. And we can talk about what's going on in the Great Lakes. And here's the Alliance's website, phone number, and email. So I want to, again, thank you all for attending. I really do appreciate it. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to.
Allan, let me pop in now. And I wanted to say what a wonderful presentation. Then I stopped. I don't think it's wonderful. I think it's very, very sobering.
Yes.
And you did an excellent job of presenting it.
Thank
I'm
you.
so glad that not only more than 100 people are participating in this today, but because it will be taped and distributed through other means, certainly in Glenview and other villages that we'll contact. I want to turn it over to Jill to see if there are any questions coming from the audience at the North Shore Senior Center. Jill?
Hi, thanks, Ron, and thanks, Allan. That was fantastic. I see Adrian has a question first, and then I think we have another.
Hi, I have 2 questions. You never mentioned styrofoam, but I'm assuming that that's just as bad for the environment as everything else. And is the filtration plant at McCormick and Howard still functioning?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your last part of your question. Let me address the styrofoam issue. Yes, there is still styrofoam being used as containers for food and drinks, and styrofoam probably will take a couple thousand years before it starts to break down. Styrofoam does not break down readily. What we were looking at when I was in safety at Quest Diagnostics, we use styrofoam chests to support diagnostic samples of blood and so forth. And we crushed the styrofoam into a block of styrofoam, and then it can be used to create things like benches and so forth. But it does not really break down. That's the kind of product it is. And I didn't get the second part of your question.
You didn't mention or talk about the water filtration plant at Howard and McCormick. Is it still functioning?
That I really honestly I don't know. I do know that I've been in the Jardine water filtration plant a few times. I have not been in the South Water, which is also functioning. So it may be, but I'm not aware of it. Sorry, I can't give you a better answer. Thank you for the question.
All right, my question is, why aren't we eating the carp and the mussels? Why not?
I can answer that, Allan.
Okay,
as
go
a
ahead.
fisherman. In Europe, they are, and if we acquired more of a taste for that, it would work because they're quite good, they're safe to eat, and they're tasty. I haven't personally tried it, but I understand that there are people looking at trying to promulgate that idea. Thank you for that. Good thought.
Thanks, Ron.
Hi, any more questions in the auditorium, anyone? All right. I'm not seeing any more right now here, Ron and Alan.
Okay, let me go to,
Thanks.
we've got several chat questions.
Okay.
Bob Dauber asked this, and it's very timely. How does the Lockport barrier work to prevent the Asian carp from getting through? If you can give us a quick answer on that, we just talked about it.
Sure. The current barrier is an electric barrier, and it sends an electric shock across from side to side. And when the carp hit it, they don't necessarily, unless they try to go through it, they don't die. They just get a shock and then they swim back. The new barrier, the Army Corps of Engineers is in the process of developing. So I don't know how it's going to work. But I understand from the Alliance that it's going to be more of a, instead of electric, a more permanent type of barrier that will go in the water, but will still allow the water to come through. So I'm thinking like a colander or something like that, where it has very fine holes, but the carp can't get through it, and it stops them from going into Lake Michigan.
Okay. Here's one from David Waterman, and it's also very timely. What should we do with the used masks that we're using now? Cut the cords before we dispose them? Anything you want to add to that, Alan?
Well, I don't know the actual material that the masks are all made of, and a lot of different material. So I imagine that most of them today are going into landfills. People are putting them into their garbage. And yes, if we could ask you to cut any elastic around it, because animals really are not as wise. So when they see something and they'll put their head through it, and then they often cannot get out. Luckily, it's elastic, so it doesn't really choke them, but.
Okay. Another question, I don't know if you can answer this. Is it true some pharmaceuticals cannot be removed and remain in drinking water?
That is.
We're getting
true.
into medical questions, and
Yeah.
I don't want you to be uncomfortable answering questions.
No, that's okay. I was in the world of pharmacy for a long time. Yes, that is true, that there are certain, it's the actual chemical component of the medicine. Sometimes it's the buffer that's used in a tablet, but for most often, yes, there are ones that's why we don't encourage people to put medicine down the toilet where it may get into the streams. We encourage you to take it to a site where they're collecting it, and what they do is they incinerate it.
Okay. Bob Bloom asks this. I've heard that plastics aren't really recycled. They are dumped here or in other parts of the world. What is the status of recycling plastics?
About 5 to 7% of all the total plastics that you put in your recycling bins all over get reused in some respect. The rest goes into you saw the picture of the landfill, with the loader on the top. That's where they go.
Okay. Do you know this one? This is from Tom. Is there renewed talk of piping Great Lakes water to states out west? Do you know any help in that area?
There has been talk. I know the Alliance is not really involved in that area of piping water all the way out west. Anybody that needs fresh water is looking for any source that they can get. And obviously, the Great Lakes, when I talk about it, it's the world's largest usable source of fresh lake water. The Arctic, when you have it frozen, is the largest real source of fresh water, but it's frozen. You can't use it. The Great Lakes is the usable source of fresh water. So yes, everybody wants it.
Well, this is kind of tied to that. The Chicago area, this is from Mickey Droschler. The Chicago area takes 1 billion gallons of Lake Michigan out and returns none back to Lake Michigan. How do we recycle our water? I know how some of us recycle it, but I would like your answer.
Well, that's what, things like rain and snow and ice does. It helps recycle the water. I mean, right now we are having significant rain events. even though we are in a quote unquote drought area, when it does rain, it rains significantly. And that's why the levels of the lakes are at an all-time high. So yes, we are taking water out, but a lot of it gets treated at, we have treatment plants. I can't remember what they're called, but there are treatment plants throughout the city. We have one up here at 2E and 83, and there's a couple on the south side of the city where they actually take the water and they recycle it, treat it, and do put it back in the lake.
We have a request that your email be routed. I'm going to ask Jill to please send to all attendees your email address, if
Okay.
you don't mind. Are you okay with that?
I'm fine with
Okay.
that.
And with all of the links that we put on chat,
Okay.
so that will go to you rather, and in the interest of time, because we're at 11:30, I'm going to ask Don Packard's question.
Okay.
Let me find it here. And this will be our last question in the interest of time, Alan.
Okay.
There are more, including many comments how great the presentation was.
Well, let me say, if anybody has a question, they can certainly email me and I'll try and answer it.
Okay, terrific. But the last question is, where is the most resistance coming from in fighting all of the 5 problems? Where do we find the resistance? If we can try not to be as political, but just give us the best answer you can.
Well, I think, the infrastructure bill is going to help a lot. We're finding, because most people today don't think when they drop a bottle on the ground or a little plastic something on the ground, that it's a big deal. But it becomes a big deal. I'll give you a real quick right outside of near the Philippines in the Pacific Ocean, there are 2 floating islands that are as big as the state of Texas, where the currents come together. And it's all plastic floating in the ocean. Nobody wants to clean it up because it's too expensive. And then what are they going to do with it? There are some organizations out there that are pulling plastic out of the waters. An organization called the numeral 4 Oceans, and they make it into little pieces of jewelry that they sell and stuff. But for the most part, nobody wants to do it. And we don't think twice about using a bottle of water, throwing it in our garbage or just throwing it somewhere, and then using another bottle of water. We don't all use things like this that we can refill and use over and over and over again, or a shopping bag or things like that. So,
Alan, it's a tremendous presentation based
you.
on the comments and the number of people. We have more people that came on at the end there rather than at the beginning. So I will mention one last thing. It's in more of not a question, but a comment. I fish in the Skokie lagoons, and in recent years, I have been unable to traverse on my kayak areas because of the algae bloom. It's not so much water, it becomes almost I could walk on it.
right.
So in apologies to the people who have asked questions, take Alan up on his kindness of being able to answer your question by emails. You're going to get his email address and the links that he provided so that you can all of us can become somewhat more of an ambassador than we currently are for a very important topic.